The U.S. Supreme Court has just reinstated the death penalty for Boston Marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. In the 6-3 decision, the High Court ruled that the federal appeals court in Boston was wrong to throw out the sentence that a jury had imposed for the deadly 2013 bombings at the finish line. The appeals court had cited issues with jury selection, and they said that the trial judge improperly excluded evidence that could have shown that Tsarnaev was influenced by his brother and was therefore less responsible for the bombings that killed 5 people. Cheryl Fiandaca is joining us now, our chief investigative reporter. So Cheryl, thanks so much for being with us. Essentially, what this ruling is showing us is that the Supreme Court said, no, he did have a fair trial.
Exactly. That's exactly what they said. They said that the claims that the defense made, that the jurors weren't questioned about what they consumed from media about the bombing. But that information was out there for public consumption for a long time before the trial. And the other thing that they mentioned is that his brother had influenced him, and they did not allow the evidence to come in about that. But the judge basically, the court ruled that that was all up to the discretion of the judge. And at the end of the day, he did get a fair trial. That means that the death sentence does get reimposed in this case, which I think a lot of people were really anxious to learn about.
Right. I do want to read this quote just from Justice Clarence Thomas. It says, Tsarnaev committed heinous crimes. The Sixth Amendment nonetheless guaranteed him a fair trial before an impartial jury. He received one. And then on the other hand, you have Justice Stephen Breyer, who is writing, in my view, the Court of Appeals acted lawfully in holding that the district court should have allowed Tsarnaev to introduce this evidence. So obviously we know that 6-3 decision, but still an extreme line here between the justices on what's going to happen. So the next thing we want to ask you is, what is actually the likelihood? Because we know that under the Biden administration, they want to actually study the death sentence, and they want to put that on hold.
Right. The Biden administration has come in and basically said that we want to have a moratorium on any federal death sentences, so that this could potentially hold up any imposition of that sentence at this point. When Trump was in office, there had been a moratorium for many, many years, and he reinstated the death penalty. And I think there were about 17 executions during his time.
So the likelihood actually right now of Tsarnaev, we know he's in prison in Colorado right now, but kind of the next steps, I guess if you can walk us through them. I mean, what would happen next? Or this is really almost like a symbolic ruling, and for the moment, things just stay in place as they are? Right.
He'll just stay in what's called Supermax, and that's where he is in Colorado. It's a very, very, very secure facility that is run by the federal government in really the middle of nowhere. Everything is very automated there, which means that he has very, very little contact with any humans. The doors open automatically. All the other doors are closed. He's very limited in the activities he can participate in, visits and any kind of interaction with anybody else, very limited. So he's he's basically in a very isolating situation, and has been for many years.
We were saying earlier, this is kind of the end of the road for him, because this has gone through the appeals process now. So there's really, from this point on, it's just a matter of waiting to see if and when that death penalty is actually followed through on. But there's no other appeals or anything else, nothing else that you can foresee.
At this point, I would say no, but there are other, obviously, they're going to continue to keep looking and continue to put cases before the Supreme Court in the hopes of being able to get the death penalty commuted down to a life sentence. But at this point, I would say that it's going to be a waiting game to see whether or not the death sentence will actually be imposed.
Do you have any insight at all at just maybe some of the families of the victims from the Boston Marathon bombing and what their thoughts have been on this process, and maybe how they would feel about today's ruling?
Well, I think, they've been through so much. I mean, just such an unbelievable group of people who, were just put into this unimaginable situation. It's just been incredibly tragic. A day that was supposed to be so beautiful and wonderful turned into just an absolute nightmare for so many families. And they've just been remarkable in the way that they've carried themselves and the way that they've, shown up for court and testified and were a part of a process that was extremely painful for them. So I think for many of them, they were hoping that to be able to get this news, that they were able to move on and put this behind them and not have to think about Dzhokhar Tsarnaev and think about his life or any other issues involving him at this point.
Right, to close that chapter and get some sense of closure. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, Chief Investigative Reporter Cheryl Fiandaca, thank you so much for your insight and walking us through everything. Sure. Appreciate you being here.